My name is Pat Hamilton, and this is Hamilton Handmade. So a few months ago, after our school system shut down, my wife and I prepared to go back to work within the schools. Now, I shared a video earlier about me creating a hands-free hand sanitizer station. The next thing on her list was a barrier for her desk. So she wanted some sort of plexiglass at her desk so that she could take her mask off, do her work, and if a student came up, both of them would be protected and safe. We wanted something safe, something protective, but we also wanted for the students to feel comfortable. As many of you know, my wife is a Spanish teacher, so I designed up a fruit stand that would fit around her desk and we could connect plexiglass to it to act as that barrier. So you still get the safety, but then you have some fun added into her classroom as well. The inspiration from this fruit stand came from an old platter that my wife had. This was a platter that her parents brought from Puerto Rico and later gifted to her. So we knew that we wanted this to look rustic, almost shack-like, so I decided to design it as a lean-to. I started out by going ahead and cutting all of my framework using my chop saw. I knew that the front two legs needed to be shorter than the back two legs, that way I had that lean-to style. After I had these pieces cut, I laid them on the ground in my garage and began putting parts of it together. I started with the facing and connected legs to the front half, and then flipped it over and started with the back half to connect the longer legs to my back facing. Now that my front half and back half were created, I needed to connect these to create 4 legs to place my roof on top of. So I started creating braces to go in between those. I thought that the perfect length would be about 2 feet. That way it's not too long, I could save some lumber, but it would still help stabilize the roof. I drilled some pilot holes after I cut these pieces, and then I went ahead and connected these to both sides of the legs to connect the front half and the back half. Using a measuring tape is a great skill to have, but I always like to try to match up my wood and make marks instead. This saves a ton of time, and you tend to be a little bit more accurate because you're getting the exact line of where that distance is. So I went ahead and put up a side piece to the top, angled it the way that I needed to, and then just marked off on the edges. This is how I determined what angle I needed to cut on my chop saw. This next part I also did a little bit different. I wanted to connect the side piece to the front and the back braces going across. That way, that could be the framework of my roof. I can take off the box from the legs and work separately. Now that I was able to figure out the exact dimensions and my angle for the roof, I disconnected that from the legs. I knew that I needed something fairly sturdy but lightweight on top so that I could glue fake shingles to it. I decided to go with ram board. Now this is where I enlisted the help from my mom. So we laid out the ram board, rolled it out, cut it to size, and then she went back and stapled that ram board to my 1x pieces. Now for the shingles, I had to get a little bit creative. Luckily, I had some foam left over from a set piece that somebody was throwing out. I saved it and knew there would come a day when I could use it. I decided my best route for making it look like there were shingles without having to glue each individual piece was to make strips. So I cut out curves to mimic the shingles and then ripped that down into one strip. I repeated this process several times. Once I had those strips cut, I laid them and stacked them on top of each other, offsetting the end of the shingle so that it looked like they were stacked and separate pieces. Now that we have the strips cut, it was time for one of my favorite parts, and that's adding in a bit of detail. I ended up using an orbital sander to sand in between each curve to give it a real 3D look. I made sure to dig in certain parts and keep it kind of random. That way it looked rustic weathered, and looked like it had been sitting up for a while. I sized up these pieces and tried to figure out the perfect placement on top of the roof. Now that I had a game plan to go forward, I decided to take those pieces off and add the roof back to the legs. Now that that roof was dry fit back into the legs, I could begin adding some detail on the actual wood portion of the structure. Now for this, I used an angle grinder with a sanding disc on it. I made sure to curve around some of those 2x4 edges, dug into those just like I did with the roof. Now, this gives it a rustic look, looks a little bit better than just those smooth, manufactured 2x4s. I did this pretty much all over and really roughed it up as best as I could without leaving splinters. Now it was time to add on the shingle strips to the roof. I did this using a hot glue gun. I started filming this and then the camera shut out on me and died. So we'll skip over this portion, but just so you know, I used pretty much a whole entire box of hot glue sticks. This next part is where I ended up using my mom the most. See, most of the projects that we work on, I'm great at building, I'm great at designing, but boy, do I hate painting with every single bit inside of me. My mom's pretty good at painting, so we make a perfect team. We went ahead and added on a base coat of just a light brown over everything. Then we went back and added in some grain work with just a dry brush and some black paint. I ended up adding a little bit of the black paint to the brown paint, mixed it together to give some different shading. That way it looks like real wood all on top of this structure. So we used scrap pieces here and there. Most of it was painted all different colors. When we started putting it together, it looked like total trash. But it always amazes me how when you put a coat of paint on something, make it uniformed, it really comes together and looks like a full piece. Once we had it all painted, ready to go, we loaded it up in the car and took it to my wife's work. Now, this is where my wife took over most of the rest, where she decorated it and really brought the fruit stand to life. This was a really fun weekend project, and it offered some security, some safety, and some peace of mind to my wife. She added some really cool touches with the fruit. She even added in some jalapenos, added in a parrot on the back, and then we went back and added the plexiglass on the sides and the front for safety. You can barely see the plexiglass. It doesn't feel institutionalized, and it really brings a fun atmosphere to her classroom. Hopefully this sparks some creativity and gives you some ideas for your own project. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this fruit stand. Please be sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss another Hamilton Handmade project. My name is Pat Hamilton, and this was Hamilton Handmade.